Hey everybody, Eric here. Are you a true crime buff like I am? I, of course, love paranormal. That's why I do the podcast and investigate and all that good stuff. But I also love true crime. And one of my favorite and one of the best true crime podcasts out there is Music City 911 with host Brandon Hall. He has been a dispatcher in Nashville for many, many years and does an amazing show where he plays 911 calls for you and let you know the behind the scenes of the 911 center and what he does. Very interesting. If you love true crime, you will love this show. Check out this snippet from his show and let him explain it better than I could. And go check out Music City 911 anywhere you listen to podcasts, and we will get to this week's episode right after this.
The world of 911 emergency dispatching is brutally diverse. 1 minute you can be talking with someone about parking violations.
What's the process we are to take to have people towed? Because it's actually delaying the mail.
And then all hell can break loose. Then the rest of the day is crazy. We could have murders.
Hill County 911, what's your emergency?
I just killed my children.
Home invasions.
He's in my house. I shot him.
You shot him?
He was coming up towards me and I shot him.
Natural disasters.
Tornadoes may have got us. I'm buried under a bunch of my life.
Even bombings. My show, Music City 911, will put you in the dispatcher's chair, put you ear to ear with the callers and responders, and keep you on edge from start to finish. I hope to both educate and entertain, as I'm a 911 dispatcher with over 20 years experience. And just like dispatching, every episode is different from the last. Music City 911. Real 911 calls, real 911 dispatchers. Available to listen to on any podcast app.
Join us as we dive into the history, hauntings, and high strangeness of the world to try to better understand the paranormal. I will be your guide. I am paranormal researcher and investigator Eric Freeman-Sims. Welcome to the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today we're chatting with paranormal investigator and author Pamela K. Kinney. Pamela has written 10 nonfiction paranormal books as well as numerous articles. She's a co-producer and investigator for Paranormal World Seekers TV series. Today we're going to chat about her latest book, Werewolves, Dogmen, and Other Shapeshifters Stalking North America. You can find Pamela's books on Amazon Kindle and her website, PamelaKKinney.com. Hey Pamela, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. So, You've kind of dove into the world with this new book, into the world of werewolves and dogmen. I've been fascinated by this topic here lately, and even went to a Dogman Cryptid conference here in Tennessee where I live. And you're from Virginia, right?
Right, I'm from Virginia, right by the Richmond area, actually.
Yeah, and you've actually some of your books you've written are actually about haunted Virginia and kind of paranormal goings on around Virginia.
Right, there's a lot. At least there's 5 right now. There 6th one has gotten my rights returned to me. It's going to be coming through another publisher, so I have a little more added to it. That's Haunted Surrey to Suffolk, Spooky Tales Along Route 10 and 460. So it'll actually be a Virginia publisher that will have in charge of it as its second, edition. So
yeah,
and it'll have some little extra stuff added to it.
That's awesome that you get to go back and put some more stuff in there. Because I know I talk to a lot of authors and they're always like, well, I wrote this book, but then I heard so many more stories afterwards.
Yeah. You can never stop. Believe me, there's always something you learn more and more.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So how did you get into the paranormal and writing the paranormal books and the stories?
Well, my editor, who also wrote horror fiction like I did, and we were part of Mid-Atlantic Horror Professional, she got a job at Schiffer. That was for the ghost books. And she kind of posted on our forum that we had, if anybody wanted to write about real ghost stories, not made up ones. And I, of course, had heard stuff growing up, even out in California. That's where I came from, from Virginia. So I thought, Hans Ozer, I read that growing up. I thought, I wouldn't mind doing that, and I always liked that stuff. So I looked up a book proposal, how to do that. That was totally different than writing fiction. You just send the whole fiction in, but book proposals, you kind of try to send it to them, and then they decide if they want you to write the book. So I did that, wrote one for Haunted Richmond, and sent it off. And it took about a month. They kind of had their little meetings to decide, the head of the publisher, which was Schiffer and all that, and they accepted it. So from then on, it's been all the other books after that. And the Werewolf, Dogmen, and Shapeshifters, it was 2020. You couldn't go anywhere, right? And
yeah,
a lot of people were freaking out. I had my one freak out for the week, and I said, heck with it. Why am I freaking out? This is a perfect time, for me I can't go anywhere that much anywhere, so, no reasons to do anything. So I wrote 3 books, 2 novels and this book, and ordered a lot of books from Amazon, and then I, of course, looked online and did eventually check I could do some interviews and stuff like that, or listen stuff, and even, wrote the book. And I was trying to figure once I got it all edited, who should I send it to? Maybe I should send Schiffer, because the reason I didn't get Haunted Series suffix for them is they thought at the time that regional ghost books weren't selling. Well, this wasn't regional, this was the whole United States. But
right.
Ended up, I said something to my publisher, Dreampunk Press, who had a couple of stories through their anthologies about it, and she accepted it. And it was, later on I asked her, why'd you accept, you publish horror, science fiction, and fantasy fiction, but, this is nonfiction. She said, well, it fits the same stuff, basically, just this is more of people to learn things about that stuff. And it's been selling for her really good.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really enjoyed the book. I love that you put so much research into the history, starting out in the book in your introduction. Yeah, you go through kind of the world history of werewolves and shapeshifters and, a lot of the folklore and things. And I think that's very important. I talk a lot about history on the show here, whether it's a ghost or cryptids.
Right.
It's important to know where these things come from to kind of understand them better. And the fact that there's evidence going back through Native Americans and Greeks and like all over the world.
Right. Even the Bible. Even the Bible, St. Christopher was considered dog-headed. Yeah,
and going back to Egyptian times, you had the god Anubis who had a dog head.
Right.
With like the Skinwalker Ranch show being so popular and a lot of this coming to pop culture, people don't realize that these stories have been around for thousands of years. And it's not just some, thing that people are just now coming out talking about. I think people feel more emboldened because of books like yours and other researchers out there who are bringing this kind of to the forefront. They feel more comfortable coming and sharing their stories because they don't feel so crazy about their experiences.
Right. I will disagree with the dogmen hunters. They say they call them dogmen because they got short snouts and wolves don't. I got news for them. I have a picture in there if you've seen it. It's a timber wolf from our zoo local. My Siberian Husky that I had for years until he passed away had the same length of snout. So if they're talking about like the only dogs that are small snouted are those bulldogs and that. And now that scientists have finally said that dogs actually are wolves, they just came from 2 Asian and another breed in past history, historic times, prehistoric time, and they just got together with human beings. They're not actually just separate canids. They're actually the same canids.
Yeah.
Just over the years, we changed dogs, and maybe who knows what we did to make all these different dogs, but they're all descended from wolves. That's what they are. And I felt vindicated when I heard that. I said, good, see? They are wolves.
Yeah.
And all these werewolf stories for years, kind of, that's kind of cool that we had these dogmen to do the same thing. They look the same thing.
Yeah, and kind of the difference is that werewolves are kind of shape-shifting people to where dogmen are, I guess, always in that form.
But we don't know. Anything at this point. And let's be honest, people thought shapeshifters. They could have saw something and thought it was a shapeshifter.
Yeah.
Maybe, we don't know. How everything comes at some point. And urban legends can sometimes have basis in facts. So what can we know for sure?
Right. And people are still having sightings of dogmen, werewolves, that type of creature to this day.
Right.
And so you start out with the werewolves in Virginia, kind of out where you live. There's some famous ones like the Rougarou in Louisiana. the
Right.
Louisiana swamp. People might have heard of the Rougarou, but a lot of these other stories I'd never heard. I'm more of a ghost guy, but that's kind of my forte as an investigator.
Well, I live in an area that Werewolf of Henrico, that's in my ghost books too, because I found out about that, and there's been stuff to do with that. And that's a current day sightings. And it's interesting that's not far from me, really. So right here, it's in the Richmond area. And then there's find out, that's why I said later on that the haunted third of Suffolk, I found out about the Dismal Swamp. Well, they call it the werewolf. I mean, they never said anybody saw it change shape or anything, but that's what they called it. Back then, they didn't know the term dogman. They just said werewolf. Right. So there was a scene in the Dismal Swamps in the 1800s. So that was a new one, and which will end up in Surrey to Suffolk too, because it's in that area. So there's just a lot out there. There's a past history, and then what they call werewolves, and then of course now they call it the werewolf of Henrico. I actually coined a term because there was no name. They just said it's been seen in these parts of Henrico County and in 2 areas. People had experiences. I said, well, what am I going to call it for this chapter? And it was in Haunted Richmond too, and all that, and actually also Haunted Virginia, Werewolf of Henrico. And it was kind of interesting that with Linda, what's the one that Godfrey writes all that stuff? Yeah, she has that in one of her books in her anthology across the United States. Because when I got all those books to look up stories and stuff, she called it Horror from Henrico. I said, well, I started that. Because it wasn't called that, and it was online. People had an online forum talking about these sightings. So
yeah. Linda Godfrey, she kind of is responsible for kind of bringing a lot of this forefront with the Beast of Bray Road. Kind of became popular on TV shows and things like that.
Right.
But yeah, this has always fascinated me. I've always been a fan of course, werewolf movies, and they had some in the 80s and stuff like that, and vampires and things like that. But the history is fascinating as well. Like I was saying, how these stories have continued up until this day. You got people going out searching for things like the Rougarou and the Beast of Bray Road, and some of these investigators, they claim, to have come across some of these beasts themselves, which is kind of interesting, I guess. But I guess if you go out searching enough, you'll find what you're looking for.
Well, the whole thing I like also writing about this is also how people interpreted werewolves, even when they were calling them werewolves, because Rougarou is the Cajun stuff, and how they believe how you can either become one or whatever like that. Comparably somewhere else, how somebody else believed they become a werewolf, and even back in medieval times. But to hear about the Rougarou, how they believe in it and stuff like that too. So it was almost interesting to also learn the mythology of some of that stuff too.
Yeah, and kind of like you were saying, the term werewolf is kind of been around for a long time. It's kind of like Bigfoot. The term Bigfoot wasn't coined until like the 70s, and before then, people just called him the Wild Man. Like here in Tennessee, we had the Tennessee Wild Man. Yeah, so now the term is just Dogmen, but they're kind of the same. Come from the same place.
Like I said, all the mythology, not just the truth stuff, but the mythology behind some of the different types of people believing how they believe a werewolf becomes a werewolf and all that too. That was interesting because the Cajun have their own belief about the Rougarou. I mean, you see it even on the shows. They talk about it, like when kids don't go out on like All Souls Day or something like that because you become a Rougarou or get caught or something like that. So there's a lot of interesting different stuff that's around there. And as a writer, it's kind of interesting because I write all this stuff in fiction too, and it gives you ideas what to do for the next story that you didn't have before. So
yeah, and also kind of seeing how we got, like you're saying, like the silver bullet myths and like the changing on the full moon, and how that kind of came from all these different beliefs from these different cultures and history.
Yeah.
And even up to today, like there's a mental diagnosis, mental disorder of lycanthropy.
Yeah, there are people that actually believe that. Yeah. And there are people that are born that can get hairy.
Yeah.
I've seen pictures where they have a child was years ago in Mexico, and he was all hairy. It's just how many of those people were accused of being werewolves.
Right, and maybe in the past that genetic trait was more dominant than it is nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you were saying with the one saint who was supposedly had the dog head, maybe he had that, overgrowth of hair on his face, and
that's what they called him.
Yeah. And even the derivation of the term lycanthropy or lycanthrope comes from an ancient king.
Right. He was cursed by Zeus because he gave Zeus human flesh to eat, and when he found out, Zeus cursed him.
Yeah, and you also put in here what I thought was fascinating with the Dogmen is that they've actually come up with a classification system for there's 7 types, variants of Dogmen based on what people have reported. Some of them are really interesting. Type 3 variant 2 is a hominid body but a head like a chow, which is very specific to one dog.
Maybe that's what they meant, like short snout, but a chow would have it.
Yeah. And then you have another variant that's it looks like Sasquatch, but it actually has a muzzle. But yeah, there's a lot more of the variants. Talking to other people, talking about Dogmen and werewolves, there's kind of 2 different camps. You have the people that think maybe this is some sort of supernatural, paranormal, physical being, and then you got other people who think that maybe it's some sort of alien or interdimensional being or something like that.
Well, it's interesting as a writer, and I can't say I'm telling the truth or not. I mean, we have to have scientists to discover all this, but I do believe in dimensions. I mean, I believe that the ghost world is another dimension. There's this, because we're the 3rd dimension. We're all solid all the way around. And who's to say they're not from another universe?
Yeah.
Through time, passing through, because people say, well, where they disappeared to, I mean, otherwise we would see more of the wolf men and Bigfoot more often than we do. They disappear. I mean, but then again, we have bears. I live here, and so my husband told me the other day there was a nearby county here, and they're walking here. What's because there's a lot of woods around here, but it's not like you expect to see a bear in there. Maybe deer, yeah, but they said they saw a bear in there. So how do we know if bears can hide and suddenly come out of nowhere?
Right.
Who knows? I mean, until someone can actually prove something where they came from. That's all we can say. But it sounds interesting, the other dimension idea or something. Stephen King wrote that one novel, The Mist.
Yeah.
Where things open up and they came from another. So who's to say?
Yeah. Yeah, and the werewolf, I mean, there's so many derivations where you can get werewolves from. One of the big ones you write about in your book is witches and kind of shaman phenomena, and that's where you kind of get skinwalkers from with the shamans being able to turn into skinwalkers.
They turn into different animals, actually considered very evil. They become what they are. They're not out to help anybody. And it's a lot of them that the skinwalker, people got them misimpressed. There's even a movie out, Skinwalkers, where they're werewolves, but they're not. They're not just werewolves. They don't turn into just wolves. They turn into coyotes. They turn into hawks. They turn into all sorts of what is in the area. And so they're witches. There's also owl witches. They're shape-shifting witches. They turn into owls, and then, of course, they're cannibalistic. So that's another evil type of witch, that reason why they shape-shift. We have the Kushtiko. I don't know if it's quite, like they're not witches, but what they are. There's also a version in Alaska that shape-shifts into giant, big, 8-foot, 9-foot, whatever, otters for the otter men. And I notice it only says otter men, so it's obviously males. They have never said anything about women becoming that, but they warn, the kids, don't go into the wood. It's like the boogeyman. Don't go out there. You might get, listen to a voice and get caught by the otter man. You'll end up becoming one. So,
yeah, that's interesting. Were otters. I first became aware of the kind of werewolf phenomena possibly being real. I was watching, and this has been back when I was a teenager, when they first started, Travel Channel and Discovery first started doing a lot of the paranormal stuff. And I believe it was on the Travel Channel, one of their shows, but it was a story about this. There was this older man who worked in a tire shop, and these 2 boys were always told by their parents, when you ride your bike by the tire shop, like, do not mess with this guy, leave him alone, like he works in the tire shop, whatever. And and the boys claimed that when they rode by on their bikes, they looked back and kind of, it's broad daylight, but the tire shop, the garage was kind of dark. Well, they saw the old man sitting back there, and all of a sudden his eyes kind of glowed, and that kind of scared them. Well, one of the boys, his dad was the town sheriff or like the police chief. And so that, growing up, and they became like older teenagers in high school and stuff. And the kid ended up going with his dad to this guy's house when this guy had passed away. And after this older man had passed away, when they went to his house, and I forget why they went to his house, but he went with his dad, and they actually found this like shed that had shackles and manacles in it to chain something up, and there was all these scratches on the walls. And so that the kind of local folklore was that, you know, that old man was some kind of werewolf or shape-shifting type person, creature.
Well, there's the one about was on the Travel Channel about the Rugaloo that they were talking about this one guy. I can't remember which one it was. One of them, they tell the stories where he worked in a shop and he tried to hit out this woman that came in and she said, well, come meet me somewhere. And he agreed. And when he got there, she wasn't anywhere around, but he started being pursued by something that looked like a wolf or, you know, walking on its hind legs, wolf after him. And he finally got away and, she was Rugaloo. He thought about it and he says, yeah, I think she was looking for her next meal. That's what I was. So he said, from now on, I don't do stuff like that. but yeah, well, this was in Louisiana. So
yeah. Here in Tennessee, you've got a chapter in the book too on shape-shifting witches, talking about the witchcraft. Right. Here in Tennessee, we have there's a legend of a shape-shifting witch that she shifts into a black panther.
Yeah.
It's called the Wampus cat.
Right. That's a half, and some of them actually supposedly cursed that way too.
Yeah.
That's a Native American thing. Around here, North Carolina, Kentucky, that area. I know that supposedly one of them, their story that they tell, is where one actually tried to see what her husband and the men were doing. They're not supposed to go look what the men were doing, whatever it's, I guess, smoking a peace pipe or whatever they were doing. And because she got caught, she got turned. And she's half cat, half woman.
Yeah.
So the Wampus cat. And that's a form of shape-shifting. You know, I added it because, like I said, when there's some way that they've changed, that's what happens. The same thing when some people said, well, you add the Wendigo in there? I said, yeah. If it overtakes you, it's spirit. It changes you. Because if you become the real Wendigo, you got the deer horn, the whole thing that you see. Same thing, you know, like that. So anything that can change your shape is what it is. So, and that includes with the one he said, the witches and stuff. So.
Yeah, I found the Wampus cat interesting. The legend kind of goes from like Louisiana all the way up to the Midwest, and a lot of the stories come from East Tennessee, here where I live in the Appalachian Mountains. But there are like schools. I think there's like 30 something schools that have, between like high schools and colleges, that have the Wampus cat as their mascot.
Yeah,
a lot of people don't know that's where we get the term cattywampus too, is from the Wampus cat folklore. But yeah, the witch that I was talking about, the legend is that she lived in the mountains in East Tennessee and that she would steal and kill livestock and pets. And the townsfolk and the farmers got tired of it, so they wanted to catch her in the act, but instead they caught her transforming from the woman form to a cat.
Right.
Yeah, and they caught her halfway, and she stayed kind of half cat, half woman. But yeah, the Wampus cat is described similar to a cougar mountain lion, but sometimes they also describe them as having like 6 legs. 2 are for running and 2 for fighting.
Right.
So it's an interesting looking 6-legged cat. But yeah, I always find the Wampus cat interesting because, like I said, you know, I grew up hearing about the Wampus cat living here in Tennessee, and the fact that it spans so many states is interesting to me too, because it seems like some of this stuff would be more localized legends, you know.
But it's not. Well, people travel around too. And an interesting thing about the Native American ones, and that's actually, and it started with the Native American, that one, but is I noticed something that nobody else has probably noticed. I know what skinwalkers, they say that the Navajo don't want to talk about them because if they think about them, they're going to come to their place and you know, to them, and they don't want them to. Well, I kind of found 2 other Native American shifters that are like that. One was a Wendu, I can't remember the name, how to pronounce it. It's a small, short thing that I found about it. The other one was actually the Kushtaka, the otter men. They say the same thing. They don't talk about them, think about them, because if they do, that will get their interest in the person that's thinking on come to them. So that wasn't just the skinwalkers that everybody talks about that. It's with some other tribes things. So yeah, I'm assuming that all the tribes are nervous when there's shifting things coming out, you know, around them.
Yeah, another shapeshifter that I thought was interesting that I never heard of was the owl witches.
Yeah, they turn into owls. A lot of them are carnivores. They cannibals, literally. And sometimes the way they turn back or something, they throw up, they come back human, they throw up the stuff or just weird stuff. But there's 3 of them. And a lot of them are more toward Florida and that area, which is with the Native Americans down there. So it was interesting to find those. So, like I said, I was having a lot of fun going through all these books and finding all these interesting things that I wouldn't have known about. And it was interesting to learn about a lot of this.
Yeah. To me, one of the scariest that you have in the book is the Wendigo. The depictions.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, the depictions of it, you know, it is really just scary, like half dead looking deer looking thing.
That's why I said that when you're possessed by this and you become like that, you're literally changed. So that's why it's a shifter. And another thing too, I was happy to find that some of the original stories that the Native Americans talk about that. So I could add that in there about the Wendigo too, so people could see some of the little stories that they told too. But yeah, you don't want to be possessed by a Wendigo; you'll become a cannibal. So
yeah, with this like half rotted deer head with antlers and like these real long stringy limbs, and just
it's real creepy.
Yeah,
real creepy,
scary looking thing. But that's another one that goes across like quite a few different Native American tribes as well. The Algonquins, Ojibways, and a few others, which I find interesting when it goes from one kind of culture to another.
Well, it's up in Alaska and Canada too. The Native Americans up there. There's even a couple of places named Wendigo, and the spelling is different too. Instead of W-E-N, they got W-I-N. I've seen. So that's why I add in there all the spellings. It's not spelled just W-E-N-G-I-G-O that we have. There's also the W-I-N-G. So there's several spellings of it. And that was interesting too. So that probably is from several of the different tribes.
Yeah. The Wampuscat. I'm sorry, I'm going through the book just to kind of remind myself. I read so many books and talk to so many authors. So
nothing wrong with reading a lot of books.
Yeah. It just talking about the paranormal all the time, it all kinds of runs together sometimes, you know. Another one that I've heard of before is especially it's not just in one area but in several different areas is the Goat Man.
Yeah. I didn't add him in there because he wasn't a shifter, but there's a lot of stories, especially the one up in Maryland. Supposedly some people say maybe he's a cause of a bad science experiment and all that stuff like that. But he's around a lot. I always thought just Maryland until I kind of realized they're mentioned quite a few states have Goatman legends. So.
Yeah. There's I'm trying to remember where it is, but there's one certain bridge that I've seen on several paranormal shows that it's the Goatman Bridge, and I forget where it's at, but if you go across the bridge, he's supposed to come out at night. And
I think that might be the Pope Lipwood. I'm not sure. I think there's a bridge though in the Maryland one too. I have to almost go back and look that up, but yeah, Maryland ones they kind of talk about it could be a science experiment, or maybe it's a real monster, and that's just interesting, you know. Well, gosh, there's in there when I added some creature that looked like they could have been sounded like that too. There's also Boar Man, Elk Man, Elk Woman, and all that. And the Elk Woman, Elk Man can probably be more likely Native American because there is a fellow, he writes horror, and but he's Native American, pure blood. And one of his novels he wrote has Elk Woman story where an elk becomes a woman because she lost her child, so she's going after these Native American guys, blaming them because they were hunting at the time for the deer elk.
Yeah.
And so, that's pretty well prevalently those, but those two are definitely connected with Native American. But there's also, like I said, the Boar Man too, someone walking on hind legs and like he's half boar. I mean, pig. So
out West Tennessee, there's a Pigman legend that's similar to that out in the Merriman Shelby Forest, I believe, is a big forest preserve out in West Tennessee.
Yeah, that's in the book. Yeah, that's in the book.
Yeah, and that's an interesting legend as well. One of the things I find fascinating too is that, you know, we've been talking about a lot of these cultures that kind of revered, like with Skinwalker and things like that they don't talk about it because they don't want it to draw attention. But there's also other tribes and other people throughout history there's one Native American tribe who actually, when they buried their ancestors, they actually would put wolf skulls over the skulls of their dead and kind of dress them up in pelts to kind of transform them into wolves. And then going back to like the Viking days and stuff, you had the berserkers.
Well, yeah, their stuff, and they would be like go really wild and stuff like wolves, werewolves, or werebears even.
Yeah,
being in that area. But and I can see why some of the Native Americans would do that, to give their ancestors a new life, but something else as a wolf, nothing else.
Yeah, and kind of, I just find the dichotomy between the two interesting, that some tribes, don't want any part of this, and then you have other tribes who kind of embraced it to kind of try to take the power of that animal, into battle with them. There's just so many stories out there of just shapeshifters, like we're talking about, through all of these different tribes and all throughout history, and even back to like Rome. The story of the founding of Rome with the two brothers suckling from
the two twins.
Yeah, from the mother wolf.
Well, that kept them alive so they could grow up, I guess, which is probably true. And but that's the whole thing with that. Remus and Romulus, all that stuff. There's a long way history with shapeshifters as it is with every part of the world at some point. And there's just so many shapeshifters. We have talk about werewolves only, but there's so many others. I mean, it depends on what part of the world it is. I mean, I've actually seen years ago in a book, like, believe it or not, where elephants in Africa, where tigers, where leopards, of course, the fox maidens in Japan. Of course, like I said, not only just wolves, but bears with the Vikings in that area. There's just so many. We even have stories you hear of people becoming dragons. So
yeah,
in old history, in a long time ago, and you'll see that in a couple of them. Shifters have always been with us probably since our prehistoric times.
There's some people that think that out in Land Between the Lakes, which kind of spans between Tennessee and Kentucky, that there was actually a family that was slaughtered in Land Between the Lakes back in the 1980s, and that the police covered it up, and they believe it was a Dogman because based on their injuries and stuff. And there was another hiker who went missing, who was apparently a really experienced hiker that went missing out there, and the evidence could point to a Dogman tearing this person apart. It wasn't kind of like any other wild animal in that area that could have done that much damage. And there is some, from what I've seen in the stories, there is some shady things that like the Park Service did and the police did to kind of sweep it under the rug and kind of keep it hush hush. But I guess at the same time, you could kind of see that with a national park like that, not wanting to put a family of 4 that got murdered out there, or a hiker that got ripped apart by a wild animal.
Right.
That's bad PR.
Especially if it's a big bear, and they might be embarrassing. Yeah, especially if you can't tell which bear it is. I do know that that's a good way of showing that maybe Dogmen can not be that far from werewolves. I mean, we see it and we think it's intelligent. It might be intelligent, but remember, we have to think about that they're animals, basically their way of thinking and what we think. And who knows what happens to those people. They can even animals can go insane too, because I used to have an animal that went that way. So, but then we have a lot of Dogmen that don't harm anybody. So
yeah, I don't think I would even want to have a good encounter with a Dogman.
No, I'd like to see one, but I wouldn't upset it. No.
Yeah.
Wouldn't upset anything. I'm probably more scared, I hate to tell you this, of a Sasquatch standing there, because I know how strong a gorilla can be.
Right.
And up at the zoo, and they're pretty tall too, so I can imagine how easy it is for them to tear us apart. So
yeah,
the Dogman would be if it's 8 foot and it's like a big wolf. I mean, wolves get big, but they can tear us. But this can really tear you. It has hands, so it's not just biting; it can tear you apart.
Right.
So
yeah, and there's encounters that I've seen with Dogmen of them chasing people's cars down the road, of them chasing people. Not so long ago, I saw a story of a guy that was running, I believe out in Wisconsin, and he's kind of lives out where all the cornfields and things like that are. And he claims that one kind of tracked him and followed him in the corn, and he got to this point to where he didn't want to see what was in the corn, but he had to cross this road, and whatever it was would have to cross the road to stay in the corn as well. Well, he just took off running as fast as he could because he could see his best friend's house. And when he did that thing, it came out to cross the road to keep following him, but it was like stalking him. And he saw it when it came out of the corn, and he said he just ran as fast as he ever has in his life, ran into his best friend's house, slammed the door, and locked it. And his best friend didn't believe him, but saw how upset he was. And so I think he ended up spending the night at his friend's house and wouldn't go back outside until the next morning. but it scared him so bad. I mean, there's other stories of people. I was talking to a gentleman the other day, Ron Murphy, who does a lot of cryptid research and Dogmen and things like that. And he said that he heard a story of a guy who he was a hunter in the woods and had been hunting his whole life. And he just saw one and he lost all control of his bowels and didn't even have like a negative interaction with this thing. He just saw it. And he's like, what would this guy gain by telling me that he, soiled himself, as a grown man in the middle of the woods? But he said that the guy never went back out hunting again after that. So I just find those stories interesting of, these people don't have anything to gain by telling these stories. And not all the stories could be misidentification. I think some of them probably are, like we're talking about with bears and maybe big wolves and things like that. But yeah, definitely interesting subject.
Oh, you can tell difference between a wolf and a bear.
Yeah.
At least I can. I don't know how many people can, but I know I can. But like I said, they are out there. The bears can hide in a local county here, and we're not near the mountains in Richmond. They have to come far. And there's been bears, they come out of sleeping where they're sleeping at, and you'll see them walking in the news down Richmond roads, or where are they coming from? I mean, there's no mountain caves to hide in, so that just shows you if a bear sleeps somewhere and not be found or come out of somewhere, who's to know what else can be hiding in the woods. Deer do it all the time.
Yeah, we had a similar thing happen here in Middle Tennessee with big mountain lions. Mountain lions hadn't been in Middle Tennessee in hundreds of years from what they claimed. And they're typically, East Tennessee, the mountains out in Appalachia and stuff. But people have been claiming to see them. And it actually took some hunters catching clear images of what are definitely mountain lions on their cameras.
Oh, they're out there.
But, well, it was before like the TWRA, which is the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency, they kept denying it for the past 15 years until there was just so much evidence that they finally had to say, yes, mountain lions are back in Middle Tennessee.
Well, they say they weren't here since the 1900s in Virginia, but people have had sighting. They know, and you can tell the difference between a mountain lion and a bobcat.
Yeah.
Honestly, them on the tail and everything. I grew up out west, so I'm used. That's a pretty big thing in California. Actually, a lot of mountain lions are all around. But considering that we, the people, are moving into the country more and more into their habitats, animals are being forced out. And I can tell you right now, mountain lions are coming here.
Yeah.
And they finally had a couple of signs that they now say, yeah, I think we might have. And it's real easy for them to travel. Coyotes travel. Mountain lions travel so that they can go somewhere else that come into back where they weren't for a long, long time. So that's not a shocker to me. Animals travel, and if they're forced out of their areas, they'll go somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, I really, really enjoyed the book. I want everybody to go out and pick it up. It is Werewolves, Dogmen, and Other Shapeshifter. I'm tongue-tied today. I'm sorry. Werewolves,
That's okay.
Werewolves, Dogmen, and Other Shapeshifters Stalking North America.
I'm sorry. I wrote a book that was a tongue.
No, it's fine. But you can find the book on Amazon Kindle and at your website, PamelaKKinney.com. So what else do you have coming up here soon?
Well, I just had an anthology come out. That's fiction. So I have Blame It on the Pumpkin by the same publisher, Pumpkin Hollow. I do have nothing nonfiction at this point. I do have actually two nonfictions. One is supposedly I'm waiting for her to say it's finally going to come out on paperback. This is just one woman did it. It's a ghost one, and she has it on Kindle right now. You can get it for like 99 cents on Kindle. It's ghost stories, real ghost stories. But my story has, because we investigated last year, Roseville Plantation, and since I already had a second edition and second printing of I couldn't put that in there, but we investigated, and I got a picture of 3 pictures showing it, why that one is obviously a figure standing there, because the first 2, one is daytime, one is nighttime. There's nothing there to show you that can make it anything else but what it was, a figure. So that's that, and I'm waiting for the paperback version because she said that she was doing well with the ebook version. The other one is it's actually about scarecrows and stories about them and history and mythology and all that stuff. And it's on hauntjaunts.net. I can't even tell you right now exactly the link, but hauntjaunt.net and look up her blog. It's in there. It's about scarecrow scary or not. That's something interesting.
Yeah, there's a whole history and mythology behind those. That sounds interesting. I have to go check that out.
And I do have another story coming, an anthology. I don't know if it's going to be this year or it won't be till beginning of next year, but it's called Vinyl Cuts. And we had to take songs from the 50s, 60s, or 70s. I took one from the 60s that was well known, used a lot during World War II as a song. So yeah, got to get out of this place. And I used some of my knowledge from all this stuff I've been doing ghost books then, and used the ghost stories and the Maroons that hid in Dismal Swamp that African Americans escaped from their slave masters and hid there and lived in there, and turned it into a ghost story in our time. So yeah, it made it into that anthology. So whenever it comes out, it's Vinyl Cuts. So
yeah, that sounds like fun too. I love ghost stories, whether they're real or not. I think especially this time of year, we're getting into, kind of going into fall, and it's just kind of that type of year to get spooky.
Yes, it really is.
All right, everybody, go out and grab Pamela's books, whether you want the fiction, nonfiction. She's got a lot to offer there, and she also has some articles that have been published across websites and magazines, and they can find all of those on your website at PamelaKKinney.com.
And they can find the links to it to where they're at. And Werewolf Dogmen, it's more than just Amazon. If you're not too crazy about Amazon, it is on BarnesandNoble.com. It is on BooksAMillion.com, Bookshop.org, IndieBound.org. It can be found. Your local independent bookstore can order it. It's for Ingram, so distributed. So it's everywhere.
That's awesome. Everybody go out and pick up the book. Check it out. Thank you so much, Pamela, for coming on and chatting with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody. Have a good day. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, head over to the Unseen Paranormal Lounge on Facebook for all the latest updates and discussions about the show. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, or at unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And please rate, review, share, and subscribe to help more people discover the show. The Unseen Paranormal Podcast is proud to be the ambassador for paranormal for Verbal.com. A big thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. You can find more of his music on Apple, Amazon, or Spotify. And as always, thank you for listening.